Welcome back to the latest episode of the Key and Mang audio experience. I'm your host, Mang. As always, with my fellow co-host, Key. Key, what's good?
What's up, Ming? How are you?
I'm good. Just preparing for Hurricane Hillary to pull up to South LA. How are you?
Hurricane Hillary. I don't know where to get these names from. I want to be named a hurricane to be named after me. I feel like that'll be cool. Hurricane Kiani. It sounds really chill, but you don't really know what's gonna happen.
I mean, with the hurricane, you are gonna know what's gonna happen though.
No, some are more intense than others. Hurricane Hillary, I don't even know what that sounds like. It sounds like it's gonna be chill. It sounds like people are gonna make a big deal out of it, but it's not gonna be that bad. Hillary can't be
Hey,
that vicious.
I hope so. I hope so. Look, this is my first time in the weather situation like this, like a hurricane, so or a tropical storm. So we'll see how this goes.
You're in
And if
Cali
I'm
though.
yeah, but people don't aren't used to dealing with that stuff here. There hasn't been one since 1939, like a tropical storm.
But I feel like it's gonna be like mid. You know what I mean? I feel like when it downpours crazy over there, people go nuts. Like they're just not used to it.
Yeah, probably. Yeah,
Like
everyone's gonna
Texas
be
getting
yeah.
snow.
I Facts. Yeah, I agree. I'm just gonna be curious to see how people are on the roads. People already don't know how to drive when there's rain on the road, so it'll be interesting if there's like floods or something.
Yeah. Be well, be safe. We got this.
I will. I will appreciate you. But today we're going myth busting in a world where information is at our fingertips with our phones or the internet. It's easy to fall victim to common misconceptions. So today we're going myth busting and shedding some light on some of these myths that we've heard over the years. Be able to explain some truth and then some tangible tips to be able to implement. So the first one we're going to talk about is peace and love versus rice. And we're talking about in the injury standpoint, if you've sprained an ankle, jammed a finger, hurt yourself, you're usually told rice, rest, ice, compression, elevation. Funny story, by the way. I had a patient one time. She was telling me that she got a surgery, and she was like reading the instructions from the doc, and it said rice. So she was like, her niece, her daughter was taking care of her, and she was like, "Where's my rice at?" Like thinking she was supposed to dip her foot in rice to help with the healing process, and not the acronym. So I laugh. I haven't laughed like that in clinic for so long, but it was so funny. I was crying.
I
But
would have been.
anyway, back yeah, it was a good time. It was a good time. But back to so we had a good laugh about that. But rice rest, like when you get injured, you're resting for 24, 48 hours so things calm down. Ice to help reduce the inflammatory process and pain as a pain response, compression just to help mitigate the swelling and bring down, like move it up the chain, and elevation to help your blood get back to your heart and circulate it out of your body. So that's what we have been told to do whenever you get injured. Then we got more evidence to suggest that maybe that's not the way to go about it. So that's where this peace and love comes in. P for protect, and that's to unload or restrict the movement for a couple of days to just make sure you don't make it worse. You're still dealing with the injury, pain response is high. Want to make sure you don't do anything to exacerbate that. Elevate, you're still going to elevate just to help with getting that flow back to the heart and help get tissue out of like lower extremity or upper extremity out of your system. A for avoiding anti-inflammatories, and that's where some of the change in some of the research has come in. Usually when you get hurt, you might take like ibuprofen, something to help with the pain response, but you don't want to change the inflammatory process because the inflammatory process is part of the healing process. So when you get injured, our body sends a response to send a bunch of healing nutrients to the injured area and start the rebuilding process. And that's where you see an influx of fluid, and you think that might be bad, but really it's good. It's part of the natural process. And if you take an anti-inflammatory to try, then you could be delaying the healing process. So that's why they suggest now to avoid anti-inflammatory modalities and rely on the healing process to go about healing from injury. C for compress, we're keeping that the same. We're still going to use compression to reduce swelling and just make things more tolerable. E is for education. So now it's trying to shift, as providers, trying to shift the narratives about rice and just resting completely. And now understanding what is happening and what is going to happen moving forward. Once pain starts to go down, it's okay to move it. And that'll get into the and love part of the acronym. But education is a big part, and knowing that now's the time where you're going to hear not to use anti-inflammatories, time to hear about the compression to protection, all that stuff, and then what to expect moving forward. So that's a big part of that first part of the peace project. And then the love, now as things have calmed down a little bit, you're going to start to load it, load it in a way that's not aggravating, but you'd still want to get movement to the area because we're on our feet, we're on our hands all the time. You do want to allow the body to adapt to the stresses that you're placing on top of it, on it. O for optimism, understanding that, it's a long process getting through an injury, but being positive about your outcomes and who you're around and who you have around you and the team that you have around you to help you get through your injury. You're going to get through it if you stick with it and do the little things every day. V for vascularization, just getting blood flow to the area. That helps with the movement, that helps with the optimism and the loading. So as you get more movement to the area, you're going to get more blood to the area, which increases your tissue temperature, gets you ready to do what you need to do. So that could be aerobic exercise, that could be swimming, that could be gentle things that get you moving, but also improve your heart rate and heart function. And then E is for exercise. As you start to get away from the initial painful stages, you start to do more and more, but listening to your body, listening to paying attention during and afterwards is very important. So if you're progressing well and not getting super swollen after, or you're progressing or you're doing an exercise and you're not and you're feeling good, then you continue slowly, drip by drip. But if you do an exercise and you start to swell up crazy, then you just dial it back a little bit and then work your way up to that point over the next couple of weeks, and your body's not ready for it yet. So you're slowly titrating the amount of activity and exercise you're putting through limb to get you back to full 100% function, the things that you were doing before you got hurt.
Nice. Good job going through all those. I think that I like this acronym 1,000 times better than just the rice, not only because it is very realistic and it's up to date with like what research is showing, like early mobilization and activity, but also it shows the value of working with a professional that has expertise in the injury or whatever problem you're dealing with. So the education, loading, optimism, and exercise can't really be done individually unless you have that expertise. So unless you're like a doctor or a PT who knows how to do these things. So I like this acronym because it shows the importance of working with one, and it allows people to take a more active approach as opposed to just resting, icing, doing compression and elevating. It's not getting you to what you want to get back to, and it's probably decreasing your overall physical function and health. So I just like this more proactive approach.
Facts. I think you take control of the controllables, and I think it's, I don't know, naive to think that if you hurt yourself and you take a break for a couple of weeks, that you're going to come back exactly the way you were before you got hurt. Like, that's not realistic. And so being able to gradually expose yourself to the demands that you're going to have to place onto your body is to make, one, you're just going to make sure that you're progressing safely and decreasing the risk of, an injury happening again. But two, you can still find ways to be active and accelerate that process a little bit. And even if you're injured lower body, doesn't mean you can't train upper body and improve your cardiovascular fitness that way. And you just got to be creative with how you go about things and making sure you're helping your healing process and not damaging it. So I think this gives a lot of parameters to allow for more robustness in your plan of care and still making sure that you get what you need in to help function short term and long term.
Exactly. I agree. Another, what were we gonna say?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Another misconception is the difference between, not even the difference between, I just think that most people are wanting to increase their lifespan, the amount of time that they live, but I don't think people are actually taking into consideration their health span. So when you talk about lifespan versus health span, it's lifespan is like you were born on this day and then you live for X amount of years. Oh my God, I can't talk. X amount of years. And then your health span is how long you live without chronic disease or without debilitating injuries. And I think that's more important because, yes, our lifespan has been increasing over time with the advances in medicine and things like that. But if you really look at the statistics, we're not really improving in the debilitating conditions and working to prevent these things. So really putting into perspective what you have to do to increase your health span as opposed to just trying to increase your lifespan, because it really makes it doesn't, in my opinion, I would rather live 75 long years being able to do whatever I want as opposed to living 90 years and 15 years I'm a veggie. I can't do anything. That's extreme, but um that's the way that's the way I look at it. So just differentiating the two and knowing what you can do to increase your health span as well as your lifespan.
Yeah, and I think to add on to that, I think it's important. I think the earlier you start, the better it is for your long term health. But if you're like 50, 60, doesn't mean that you can't make changes. Doesn't mean that you can't start to exercise. Can't doesn't mean you can't start to see changes. I think it's just about making small changes day by day instead of trying to make one big one and hoping that changes your life, but making small changes and small deposits day by day is what's going to be what helps you down the line or 50 years down the line, being able to still, if you want to deadlift at 80, then you're building up to that point to make sure that you're moving every day, exercising, making sure your mind is right, staying sharp, to just make sure that when it comes time to when you get 70, 80, you might have to modify some things, but you're still able to do the things that you want to do because of the little deposit that you made. Whatever age you're at, it could be young, could be old, but just one step at a time, small step, and then build your momentum from there.
That reminds me of what you said previously when you said it's naive to think that you're going to take time off after being hurt and then go back to your regular level of performance. It's kind of naive to think that if you want to be 70 or 80 years old and still be independent and functioning at a high level, to think that you would not be able to, you're going to be able to do that without preparing for it during your younger years. So for example, if you want to be 80 and you still want to be training, or you still want to be able to pick your kids up from the floor, get up and down from chairs, you should be doing things to prepare yourself for that. Because if you're not practicing that, not literally practicing getting up from the chair, but strengthening the muscles that help you do that, it's naive for you to think that you're going to be able to do that in your later years. So thinking about what you want to be able to do when you're 70, 80 years old and incorporating that into your routine in some way, shape, or form is important.
Mhm. Absolutely. Absolutely. What about the best ways to lose weight and what you see how people are doing it right now?
I think when somebody thinks of losing weight, the first things they think of is extreme dieting and lots of exercise that makes them out of breath, like cardio, high intensity exercise, and just focusing on that. And now that I've been working with a lot of people trying to lose weight and also losing weight myself, I think it comes down to so much more than just cardio and doing very intense exercises and very extreme diets, because one, you have to have the right type of mindset, because if you just want to lose weight, you have to think about Do you just want to lose weight for a certain period of time, or do you want to lose weight and actually keep it off going forward? So when you ask yourself that question, the way you go about it is going to change. You're not going to try to do an extreme diet because you know you're not going to be able to stick to that extreme diet once you reach your weight loss goal. You might not even be able to stick to it long enough to get to your goal. So taking more sustainable approaches is the better way to lose weight, but I don't think people jump right to that thought initially. They kind of have to go through the process of trying restrictive diets, trying to eliminate certain foods, and then they kind of feel like crap and realize they can't sustain it, and then kind of modify things to what fits them. But when people first think to lose weight, I think those are the first things they think of. Then they got to kind of find out on their own unless they hire a coach.
And then I also wonder about with losing weight. People would be like, I want to lose 15 pounds. I want to lose 20 pounds. And I'm like, where does that number come from? Why is that the number that you want to choose? What if you lost 5 pounds, but then your energy levels increase, you're happier throughout the day? Would that how do we find how to that number of 20 pounds, 30 pounds, 50 pounds? You know what I mean? Like, I'm just curious with I just wonder about the fascination with the number and not. I think more focus should be on how you feel about yourself, what habits you're creating versus the specific number, which I guess might go into our next myth that we're going to drop into.
I think I think the number comes from, people tend to weigh themselves often, and even if you're not weighing yourself often, I still think you know around how much you weigh or weighed in the past. So for example, say you go to the doctor one year and you weigh 120, and then you have kids, and then 4 years later you weigh 170. You kind of have that current number that you were just told, and then you have an idea of where you were before, and you have an idea of what you look like before. So I think people associate those two numbers, I mean, those two things, like the past number and how they looked, and then they'll say, I want to lose 50 pounds to get back to that. But this leads into the next point. You're right. But just because you are trying to get back to where you were doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to weigh that exact amount, because the way you go about it is going to be different. Number one. Number two, if you're getting older, the way your body composition is going to change. And when it comes to losing weight, and the number that is reflected and what's included in the number you see on the scale, it's so many different factors that the number is unreliable. So instead of trying to lose a certain amount of pounds, yes, you should focus on habits and energy levels and things like that. But I think people need to have better metrics of how they're analyzing what they want to achieve and how they're analyzing their progress. So instead of trying to lose weight, you should focus on trying to lose fat. And that's going to be the determining factor in how you look. So you can lose like 5 pounds of fat and look significantly different as if you lost truly 20 pounds, as opposed to if you were to just lose weight and lose 50 pounds, because you don't really know where that weight is coming from. So I think just shifting your perspective to fat loss and shifting your perspective to focusing on things that don't necessarily show up on the scale is your best bet. But I think that's where people's thought process is when it comes to losing weight, just because they have a certain goal they want to get back to, a certain look they want to get back to that they had before. So they associate the number they were at and how they looked, and that's how they come up with these numbers, if that makes sense.
So then, what do you say to like people who have access to, let's say, a DEXA scan or something that can measure lean muscle mass or body fat percentage? What do you say to those people who may not see a change in the weight, but they notice a decrease in overall body fat and increasing in the lean muscle mass, but people are still upset that the number on the scale hasn't changed? How do you explain that?
I would say that if you are seeing changes in your body fat and you're seeing changes in your lean muscle mass, that you're on the right track, number one. But for for them to understand that, I think they have to understand what weight is on the scale or what that number represents. So when you talk about weight, you have your bones, you have your muscles, you have water, you have different things that play into that number. So depending on how much you have of those things, that number isn't going to be as quick to change. And also when you're weighing yourself, it's also going to play a role in what you see. So it could be very unreliable, but I think if you were to take somebody's weight from, say, January 1st, you did a DEXA scan and you weighed yourself, right? And you have certain percentages, and then you did that again 3 months from now, you're not going to see a big change in your weight per se, but you may see small changes in your body fat and your muscle mass. But then if you do that same thing a year from now, you will see differences in both. But I think that in order to see true change, you need to space out the scale or like the weight measurement, because it's not going to change as fast. It may actually go up. So I think in order to see true changes, you need to have longer durations between your measurements. But people don't like that because they like to see quick change. So it's more so getting people to buy in and educate them on what weight actually means versus what fat and muscle mass is.
And since we're on this topic of body fat percentages and image, let's say there's someone who is noticing an increase in their lean muscle mass and decrease in their body fat, but is scared they're going to be too bulky or scared they're going to look like too jacked or too yoked. What kind of conversations do you have with people who might think lean that way?
I think that people first need to know what bulky means to begin with. I think that when people hear the word bulky, they think of you have a lot of muscle and you look like very strong, and you can actually see your muscles, right? And it's big muscles. But the term bulky really isn't that. Bulky is means to take up a lot of space. And usually people who are bulky have more body fat. It's not that they have more muscle, it's more body fat showing. So it gives you that bigger look. Like you look a little bit, I guess, like bloated, I would say, in your muscles. Or if you're not that toned, you just have a lot more like fat around you. So that's the first thing. It has nothing to do with muscle mass. And what I've been saying to women is that think of in the wintertime when people are like, oh, I'm going into bulk season. They don't change what they're doing in terms of exercises. They more so change how much they're eating, knowing that they're going to put on fat as a indirect result of trying to put on muscle. So that extra fat is the process that you have when you're trying to bulk. And then after the bulk, you try to cut down and shred. But as long as you have a lot of fat, you're gonna always have that bulky look. So it has nothing to do with putting on muscle. So once they understand that, you have to then have habits that are either conducive to decreasing your body fat or conducive to increasing your body fat if that's what you want to do. But it all comes down to your nutritional habits. It has nothing to do with lifting weights. So if you're fearful of gaining too much muscle and getting bulky, then don't eat for that and you won't get bulky. That's what I would say. It has nothing to do with the exercise. It's everything to do with how much fat you have. So if you don't want to look bulky, don't have as much fat. And that has nothing to do with the exercises.
Gotcha. Appreciate the
Yeah.
clarification. I just feel like those are things that I have seen across on socials and stuff. So wanted to get your thoughts on that, especially since it seems to be popular amongst the populations that you like to work with. So,
I
was just
think,
wanting to.
yeah, I think that like bulking season analogy kind of clicks for people, because a lot of people do say like, "Oh, I'm bulking," and they know that they're eating more. They know they're going to put on more fat. So it gives people a better idea of what bulky actually means. And
And then,
then go ahead.
what about for our next one? Weight equals health. I think we kind of jumped into this already, but on our last one. But I will throw it to you first, and I want to hear what your thoughts, and I'll add on.
I think health is a lot more complex than weight. One, because like I said, weight, like your body weight is comprised of so many different things. And I think that health is so like vast. Like it changes from person to person. Like it doesn't really have a look to it. And I think the only way you can know if you're healthy is to have a lot of metrics. You can't just use body weight as a metric. I think you need to have a lot of other things to give you insight. And this makes me think about a question this lady asked me like 2 weeks ago. She was like, "How do you lose visceral fat but not lose body fat?" And I was like, "That's a good question." And she was like, "And how do you target visceral fat?" And I honestly didn't know how to answer because you can't really target your visceral fat. I think this is my opinion, I think as your body fat decreases, your visceral fat is likely to decrease as well. But you can't be like, "Hey, I don't want to lose body fat. I just want to lose visceral fat." So I think having metrics that give you insight into how much visceral fat you have, like blood work is a good one. Energy levels, being able to do the activities that you like, those things are all encompassed in health. And I don't think that you can say you're healthy because you're skinny, because people can be very skinny because they have high metabolism and have horrible results on blood work, be having like certain risk factors for certain diseases, and still be within an appropriate body weight range for their height, their weight. So I think you need a lot more metrics to just say if somebody's healthy or not.
Wait, in that question that the person asked, did you say a person was trying to reduce their visceral fat and not their subcutaneous fat?
They basically said that they did the at the gym they have I think it's InBody. They give you your visceral fat on that, and she was saying that she's comfortable with how much body fat she has, but she wants to lose some visceral fat. Like, how do you maintain your current body fat percentage but improve your visceral fat?
Interesting. Because I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, but wouldn't you want to maintain your visceral fat levels? Because that's like around your organs and stuff, and that's what's going to protect your organs from if a direct blow comes to it or something like that, versus your subcutaneous fat, which is what you might see on a body, and you want to
Yeah,
decrease that.
that makes sense, but like your visceral fat is more so the fat that's around your organs, right? But then you get into like high cholesterol. Usually, if you have high visceral fat, you'll have high cholesterol, high blood pressure. So you don't want to have a high visceral fat level. I don't know the exact percentages, but there's certain percentages that make you more at risk for certain cardiac and metabolic diseases when you do have a higher visceral fat. But I think that comes down to diet.
You're good. You came back. You came back. You went out for a little.
I think it comes down to just diet and exercise the same way it comes down to it for regular body fat. So I didn't know how to
Gotcha.
answer your
Okay.
question.
Yeah. No, I feel like that's a tough question to answer. I wouldn't know how to answer it either. But that's why there's nutritionists and dietitians out there that like study that stuff. So I think that's a good question.
Yeah, and what I've seen though is as your body fat decreases, your visceral fat is gonna decrease as well. Like it usually trends together. But I guess if you're at a spot where you don't want to lose any more body fat and you want to improve your visceral fat, maybe nutrition needs to be more of your focus. I don't know, but that would be my thought.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. I also think the point you brought up about the blood work and being able to, one, if you have access to it, I think it's something that you should take advantage of. At Monarch, we do it with all of our clients every 3 months. So we look at a bunch of different markers, whether it's cholesterol levels, um, testosterone, estrogen, thyroid function, get a big picture idea of what's happening inside the body. So then you can also see the changes, body fat, lean muscle mass, but also have an idea of, all right, my cholesterol is going down. But that's probably because you're exercising more, you're sleeping better, and your nutrition habits have changed. So, like you said, I think the weight is just a component of it. But if you have other metrics that you can use to quantify how you're feeling and what you're doing and make sure that you're trending in the right direction, like you don't want your weight to be going down, but your cardiovascular factors to be going up. Like that ain't great. So just I think having more than, like you said, having more than one way to track how you're doing, and if you have access to bone mineral scans, DEXA scans, antibodies, blood work, take advantage of them if you have them. Nutritionists, medical professionals who are like about this stuff and can tailor things to you to make sure that you're getting the results that you're looking for.
Also, another thing that is easily accessible for everybody to do is tracking your resting heart rate. Like I haven't changed weights on the scale. Like I haven't weighed myself, and when I do weigh myself, I don't really see much of a change in the number, but I have decreased my resting heart rate by like 4 beats, which is good. So something that people can start to look at is their resting heart rate, their average resting heart rate, and also their recovery in between sets, like how fast your heart rate recovers if you're doing any like high intensity exercise. So that's a good metric to do, and it's totally free and it's easy to perform, easy to assess.
Mm-hmm. But it's not something that's going to change tomorrow. It's something that takes time.
Exactly. That's what all that's what all this comes back to, and I think that's sometimes the biggest thing that gets people discouraged or like holds people back is just the amount of time that they're taking to see improvements. I've been telling people, like they'll be like, I've been doing this, this, and this, and I haven't been seeing results. And I'm like, how long have you been doing this? And they say anything less than 6 months. I'd be like, yo, you've been doing this for 2 seconds. Like, keep going. Like, anything less than 6 months is not a long time. And even 6 months is still like early. You can, depending on where you're starting at, I feel like the more weight you have, let's say weight loss, the more weight you have to lose, the quicker you're gonna get it off. But if you're starting from like a slightly overweight standpoint, you might not see the changes you want as quickly. So if your starting point matters, and also like how long you've been doing it. I think people see like this, see themselves doing something for 1 or 2 months and think it's been a long time, and it's not at all. It's like a couple seconds, really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Facts. Facts. Play the long game. And then
Always.
in addition to the blood work, something that you can find that I think a lot of them are fine is your supplement levels, so your vitamin levels, your mineral levels in your bloodstream at the time. And I think that is when you can start to make recommendations on dietary nutrition function or supplements. But I feel like I've seen a lot of just, oh, I need vitamin B12 is good for energy or metabolism. Like I need to take more vitamin B or I need to get more vitamin D because blah, 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 blah. I saw this, but not knowing if you actually need it or not. I think it's just you're putting extra stuff in. You might be putting extra stuff in your body that you might not need or you might not react well to because there's an influx or deficit of a certain mineral or electrolyte or whatever it may be. So just wanted to I think the blood work is a handy metric to really know what you're missing or what you're high in and what you don't need versus what you do need and what you might consider supplementing with, whether it's with a pill or making changes to your diet.
Yeah, I agree. And that just speaks to needing personalization to everything and not, yes, the internet is good to use for baseline information, but you have to know how to apply it to your situation. And without having the actual data, you're not going to know how to apply it when it comes to supplements, vitamins, and minerals. And then even going further on some of the supplements that are out there in like the fitness industry, there's a lot of people taking supplements for the wrong reasons, thinking that it's going to like expedite their process or make things easier. But and then also using them too early. I think that you shouldn't really consider supplements in the fitness industry until you have a solid foundation. So you've been training for at least 3 months, you've got all the movements down, your habits are pretty solid, you're getting enough protein, doing all those things, and then you can start considering supplements. But I don't think you need to add supplements in as soon as you start in terms of like fitness related supplements. When it comes to vitamins and minerals, if you're deficient in any of those, you can take them without even working out. But when it comes to supplements geared towards performance and weight loss, I think that you need to have the foundation in place first.
Plus, these things are pricey. Depending on the supplements that you get, it can add up real quick if you find to be deficient in D, vitamin K, vitamin B. You get supplements for all those. That can add up real quick. And I know taking care of your health is a big investment, but it's probably the best investment that you can make in terms of like longevity and long term. But you can also see changes in your like supplement level just by what you buy from the grocery store, making a couple substitutions. Exercising more can release more things into your bloodstream that might not have been there before because you weren't consistent with the exercise. So just little tweaks like that, maybe getting more sleep can even like produce more things that you might need naturally in your body. I know there's some things naturally that we just don't make enough of, and that might be stuff that you look into, but some of the things that you might be lacking on could be changed with like exercise.
Yes, I agree. I think I'm gonna ask you this question. So if somebody, like say your client was to come to you and say that they want to like just start, they want to say they want to lose a little bit of weight and they're in PT and they're trying to figure out if they should start with diet or a training program first, what would you suggest for them to do?
That's a good question. I'm gonna say I think it comes down to both. I think the answer is both.
Mhm.
Um, but I think, like mentioned earlier, like it has to be enough to create the adaptation that you're looking for, at least with the strength training wise. And then for the nutrition, the same thing, a small change in your diet. So maybe it's instead of buying orange juice, you're eating more oranges. You're getting your vitamins that way. Decreasing your sugar intake and little things like that over time instead of trying to make a big change to no carbs or very little carbs, high protein. I might think about trying to find ways to increase your protein consumption if you're going to start strength training, just to help with the building muscle over time. But I don't think you can do one and um, I think you won't see the changes if you're trying to see big changes. I don't think you can do one without the other. Now, if you're an experienced lifter and more, then you can focus more on nutrition and vice versa. If you're good on nutrition and just want to build on see other adaptations, then I might say focus more on strength. But I think a little of both can go a long way.
I agree. I agree. But if I had to choose, I'm going to say exercise. Here's why. So I think a lot of people struggle with dieting because they try to take away everything at once. And they feel like they can't stick to that. And you have some people who go the route of trying to perfect their diet first and then start to exercise. But I think if you are restricting yourself, it's going to be hard to stick to that. And I think the benefits of exercising will give you momentum to start slowly implementing better nutritional habits. But I think when you only focus on your nutrition without exercise, it's pretty discouraging the way most people do it. So I like to use exercise as a way to get people to like start feeling better, like doing some type of movement, and then start adding other layers to that. But I think it's hard. It's always going to be harder to remove something from your life than to add it in. So always think about adding in exercise, adding in more veggies, adding in everything until you get comfortable with that, and then start taking things away. I just think people take things away too often, and that holds them back. So I would say if I had to choose, like, don't even touch your diet, just exercise, and then we'll start adding things in. And once you're adding things in, then you start taking things out. It's like kind of like a layered approach. But I've spoken to people and got into debates with people on social media, and they're like, this is the stupidest thing ever. I think it works though. So that's my opinion.
But couldn't I make the argument that if I decided to change my nutrition, like slowly change it, but maybe I'm not exercising as much, but I'm doing activities that would help with bone mineral density or um springiness or just doing things that keep me active, could you also not see like changes that way?
You can, but they'll be slow.
Yeah, but so will exercise. Exercise changes will be slow as well.
I think I think if in order to truly improve your bone mineral density, I think you have to do more than just walking and like light activity. Unless you're like starting from ground zero, you know?
I agree with that, but I'm saying like I'm doing things that like let's say I'm at the park and I'm playing, I'm jumping off of things, I'm landing on things. Like I'm doing things that are high impact that can add to my mineral density as the stress is applied over
Mm-hmm.
time. I'm not like formally exercise training, but I'm still finding ways to load appropriately enough that I could see changes. I agree, it might take a little longer, but I think
Yeah,
you
you
could, the
could.
case could go the other
I
way
think,
also.
yeah, I think you could. You definitely can. I think so. I'm just biased, but you definitely can.
No, I
Yeah,
feel you. I lean. I think I would if I had to pick one. I'd probably lean exercise too. But I'm being like you and I'm playing devil's advocate.
I like it. It's possible. I just wouldn't. It just would never come out my mouth for somebody to do that, but it would work. What do you think about? What do you think about people doing low carb?
I think it depends on what you're trying to get out of. Like, what's your conception about what's the context behind why you're doing low carb? I think if you are a someone who participates in endurance athletes, I think carbs are really good for energy, like energy utilization and having an energy storage to give you energy so you're burning off the carbs and not using breaking down protein or not breaking down muscle to get that energy. So I think it depends on what you're trying to accomplish, but I don't think you should totally X out carbs because I think you can use them for energy utilization and they're easy. You can burn them quicker than you might burn muscle or you might burn protein or something else like that. So I don't think carbs are bad. I think it just depends on what you're putting into your body and how you're trying to use them.
Yeah, I agree. I think that just all comes back down to like just having the knowledge of what carbs are for. I think at least in weight loss, people do low carb simply because they think it's gonna help them lose weight, which yes, it will, but I don't think they understand the significance or like the side effects that or how they can feel on a low carb diet. So
Mhm.
I think really just educating people on what the purpose of carbs are for and really taking a look at what their goals are. Because like you said, if they're a runner or they're an endurance athlete, you're not gonna do a low carb diet because you're not gonna perform well. Also, if you're somebody who has like a very uh, cognitive, fatiguing job or things like that, I feel like you have to pay attention to your carb intake because you're going to start to feel low energy. I think those things are important to take into consideration as opposed to just doing something to lose weight. And then also thinking about the long term lifestyle that you want to live. Is that something you want to do for the rest of your life? If that's something, then you have to think about if you can actually do that and if you want to do that and if it fits your lifestyle. So I think there's a lot of context that's needed before people make these decisions.
Yeah. I think if you decide to go on a high protein diet or a low carb diet or whatever it is, like you have to be really in tune with how you're feeling and making sure that everything else that you're supposed to have is on point. So your protein intake got to be on point, your fluid intake got to be on point, your electrolyte, vitamin levels, everything got to be on point if you're taking away such a big energy source. Like, because if you continue that diet, you're not supplying yourself with the proper fuel, you're going to come crashing down real quick eventually. I mean, the body's adaptable, but it's going to get to a point where you tip the scale the other way and you start to see like decreases in energy levels. You might start to crash more, fog, like mental fog. It's harder and then if you continue with it, it could lead to even worse things. And being in the hospital is expensive. If you're sick in the hospital, it costs a lot of money. So, whatever you can do, you do what works best for you. But whatever you have to be on point with how you're feeling and what you're making sure it's intentional to make sure that you're not setting yourself up for something worse down the line.
Yeah, I was tracking macronutrients in PT school. I was lean as hell and I tried low carb. I couldn't do low carb. It was so bad. I couldn't do low carb.
Mhm.
Then I did higher fats. I didn't really like the way I felt on that. I felt the best with like higher proteins, like moderate carbs and kind of lower fat. But I say all that to say what you said is it comes down to being in tune with how you're feeling because when I was counting macros, my classmate Sabrina, she was counting macros too. She's the one that got me into counting macros, and she was doing high fats. She was doing high fats, and I don't know what her carbs and proteins were, but she was thriving on that. And I'm like, oh hell no, I can't do that. So it comes down to figuring out what works best for you and how you're feeling because everybody is going to respond to different ratios of macronutrients depending on just like genetics, lifestyle, and just so many different things. So, yes, there's recommended amounts of each carbs, fats, and proteins, but figuring out where you feel best is a route you may want to take if you are someone who is into like counting those nutrients. I'm not ever doing that again, but it's helpful if you want to.
I've never been a tracking. I've never been fond of tracking nutrient macros and how I like what I making sure I get it. It's hard to get the amount of protein that you need if you're trying to put on like muscle and stuff, but I've always just been one to go on how I feel and I'm aware of like of what I'm eating and making sure that all right, what do I have a lean protein on here or do I have a healthy fat? Am I snacking on things like nuts or things like that that can help, increase some of the nutrients that I'm trying to get in. But I've never been one to track. I feel like that's a lot of extra work that I just don't want to take the mental energy to do.
Yeah. I forgot what I was gonna say about that. I'm sorry. Oh, I was gonna say the only reason I was able to track macros is because in school, like you're on such a routine. Like I was literally eating the same thing every other day. Like I had all of the portions there. It was so easy to just track everything. I was in class. I remember we had class like 8 a.m. to 12 in the same classroom. I would have my coffee. I would have my protein shake, my water. I would have two yogurts and overnight oats. Like I would have such a big meal before it even hit 12 o'clock. People be like, "Are you bulky?" I'm like, "No, I'm just hungry. I just need to get I gotta get my macros in." But yeah, last one. More
Last
time,
one.
more time in the gym equals better results. So I can speak about this from a weight loss perspective. I think people have the belief that you need to be in the gym for an hour, hour and a half, and then you actually look at what people are doing when they're in the gym. Most of the time is spent on the phone, scrolling, taking pics, recording, and they're not actually getting any like quality work in. So just because you're in the gym for an hour doesn't mean that what you're doing is any better or any superior to somebody who's in there for 20 or 30 minutes. It really just comes down to having the right program that aligns with your goals, focusing on things that you're good at, but also adding in some things that are going to address your weaknesses and just having the right intensity to push yourself just enough to get that stimulus that you're looking for, but not do it in a way that is going to fatigue you too much or cause injury. So I think once you have those down, it doesn't really matter how long you're spending in the gym. It's more so quality over quantity.
Yeah, I think that comes down to what your plan is and how you're going to attack what your deficits and what your strengths are. Um, we had we just had a conversation with Kamal, and well, now you can listen back to it. But essentially, he was like, for his hoopers, he'll take a look at what they're good at, what situations that they get put into games, and when they're in the gym, they target that. That's the stuff that they work on. It's not just throwing a bunch of stuff together and hoping it sticks in the game. No, it's specific things that you're going to see in the game, specific coverages, specific ways people are going to be playing you, and how do you get, how do you make plays off of different coverages? And you might change the variables so that you're prepared for a lot of different problems, but you're working to address a specific problem. And I think the same thing can happen in the gym. If you want to get decrease your weight, you might start to increase your like intensity of your workouts, but also then make sure that your recovery is on point afterwards. If you want to improve your bounce in the basketball game, you might build your strength base and then start to work on some extensive intensive plyometrics, but then also make sure that you're taking care of yourself off the court and making sure that you're not doing too much, because then you start to do those more and more, increase your intensity and not resting enough. You increase your injury risk, like you said, and then you're set back and you're having to start build your foundation again. So I think it's about having a plan, understanding that you're not going to be better day one, but by day 66, if you're working on it strategically, you'll be better than when you were at day one. And continuing to build on it over time, you can spend less and less time working on, the things that you're good at, and then focus more on your weaknesses, but also make sure that you're seeing the results that you want to see in whatever situation it may be.
Yeah. So I think all of these things that we discussed really comes back down to figuring out what works for you. Well, first of all, having the knowledge to apply any of these things, and then figuring out how it works for you and fits into your lifestyle, and doing that over time, day by day, month by month, and having the right ways to measure your progress.
Facts. Assess, don't guess. And on that note, we'll see you on the next episode of the KMA Audio Experience.
Peace.